Because I feel that in the heavens above, the angels whispering to one another can find among their burning terms of love none so devotional as that of mother. Therefore, by that dear name I long have called you. You who are more than mother unto me, and fill my heart of hearts, where death installed you in setting my Virginia's spirit free. My mother, my own mother, who died early, was but the mother of myself, but you are mother to the one I loved so dearly, and thus are dearer than the mother I knew, by that infinity with which my wife was dearer to my soul than its soul life. Thus reads To My Mother by Edgar Allan Poe. So, what are we looking at when we decide to talk about this poem? There are quite a few things that I think are worth talking about, but one caveat that I do have to tender here at the beginning of this discussion is that I'm not sure there's a whole lot of literary value to this poem. That meaning, what I mean by that is, look, you bring up I Died for Beauty by Emily Dickinson, and you can see myriad things to talk about with that poem, regardless of who Emily Dickinson was, regardless of who you are, regardless of your experience with Emily Dickinson. You bring up sonnet number 5, and there are 1,000 things that you can talk about without ever knowing a thing about Shakespeare. With this poem, maybe there are some things that are worth discussion on some level, but really all that this is a very personal poem that has found its way into publication 180 years later because or 100 yeah, 180 years later because Edgar Allan Poe, was a big deal. So the reason that we're still reading, so look, this is a sonnet that Edgar Allan Poe wrote to his mother-in-law. So there's two reasons that we still read this poem. Number one, it was written by Edgar Allan Poe. Number two, this is a sonnet to his mother-in-law, which means to this day, this is the only sonnet ever written to a mother-in-law. So those are the two reasons that we would have to discuss this poem in general, to discuss this poem at all. But if we're discussing this poem, we have to discuss this poem as it pertains to Edgar Allan Poe's life. We have to discuss this poem in relation to basically biographical criticism, which I'm not a great big fan of. I think that, in the potpourri of literary criticism, certainly biographical criticism has its place. It is something that is worth discussion. It is something that is interesting to talk about sometimes, but probably it's not the most interesting thing to talk about with any poem that is of literary merit. I'm not positive there's a whole lot of literary merit here. So the one observation that sort of should float to the top here, if you are familiar with Edgar Allan Poe's biography, is this. Edgar Allan Poe's mother died when he was 2 years old, thereabouts. Not quite two, I believe. I believe he was 1 year and 10 months or so when his mother died. So when you're talking about Edgar Allan Poe's mother, he didn't really know her. Still kept her name, or his family's name, I suppose I should say, his birth family's name. Adopted his adopted family's name as well. That is the Allan part. The Poe comes from his biological parents. Meaning that curiously absent from this poem, look, we have the mother-in-law, we have the mother. Curiously absent from this poem is Frances Allan, Poe's adopted mother. Now, why is that so curious? Poe didn't know his birth mother. He was 2 years old when she died. Poe had his birth mother up until he was 20. She died in 1829. Poe died in 1849, so he had his adopted mother until he was 20 years old. Also, of note, when we are talking about the sort of timeline to this poem was originally published July 7th, 1849. Maybe you've done some math in your head. This was published 20 years after his mother died, and only 3 months to the day before Edgar Allan Poe himself died. So, worth talking about here, worth breaking down just a little bit, although most of this poem is kind of on the nose. This is a sonnet, so we will probably be tempted to take it 4 lines at a time and then the last couplet. So these 4 lines here, because I feel that in the heavens above, the angels whispering to one another can find among their burning terms of love none so devotional as that of mother. Basically, this is saying that even the angels who deal in love, even the angels who deal in terms of love, know no word that describes love more than the word mother. Then 5, 6, 7, 8. These lines here. Therefore, by that dear name I long have called you, you who are more than mother unto me, and fill my heart of hearts, where death installed you, in my Virginia's spirit, in setting my Virginia's spirit free. Because this term procuring the most endearment, because this term is procuring the most endearment, that's what I call you, you who have been a mother plus. Kind of like Disney Plus, but probably with better programming, and fill my heart of hearts where death installed you. Look, I lost my mother. You stepped into the place. You who are the mother of my dearest Virginia, Virginia being his wife, his first cousin and wife. But hey, if we're not here to judge Edgar Allan Poe on his life. If we were, there'd be some other things we could probably judge him for before marrying his first cousin, but that's not why we're here. My mother, my own mother, who died early, was but the mother of myself. But you are mother to the one I loved so dearly, and thus are dearer than the mother I knew. I didn't really know my actual mother, my birth mother, but I do know and love you, and I love you because the thing that I loved more than anything else in this world, my dearest Virginia, you had reared, you had made whole, you had brought into being, you had taught her what life itself was until she died. And then 13 and 14, the final couplet. So, if you are not familiar with sonnets, one of the things that often helps is breaking them down in this fashion. Lines 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12, and then 13 and 14. Predominantly, that is how sonnets are written. That is how sonnets can be easiest broken down. So this final couplet here, by that infinity with which my wife was dearer to my soul than its soul life. You are much more precious to me than my real mother, as Virginia was more precious. You are as much, I guess I should say. You are as much more precious to me than my mother, as Virginia was more precious to me than myself, than I am to myself. So, if we are to zoom out and sort of take a larger context of this poem, if we were to zoom out and say, okay, well, what's worth talking about here? Look, Virginia was Edgar Allan Poe's cousin, first cousin, which makes Poe's mother in law his aunt. Now, we can judge this by today's standards, or we can just understand that the world in which Edgar Allan Poe lived was a much different world than the world which we inhabit, despite the fact that much of the audience here will be in the United States, despite the fact that it's the same country, despite the fact that it is less than a 200 years difference. Here's something interesting to think about. Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809. Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809. The American Revolution was 1776. So I am older today than was the country when Edgar Allan Poe was born. So that's kind of the world in which he was living. Was born a shade after, not quite a decade after the 1700s concluded. There wasn't, so also he took Virginia as his bride. He was 26, Virginia was 13. Not something you do in today's world. Seems difficult to understand that there was ever a time when this was a practice. Seems difficult to understand what could be going on there, right? But if we're having this discussion, there wasn't a whole lot of time in Edgar Allan Poe's world to date. You couldn't date around and have an actual productive life. Consider this. And look, I'm not defending this at all. But we have to understand it because it was true. Edgar Allan Poe, died when he was 40. Edgar Allan Poe's father is believed to have died at 27. Edgar Allan Poe's mother died at either 23 or 24. One of the interesting quirks in Edgar Allan Poe's life is we don't know really when his father died, and we don't know really when his mother was born. We have a thereabouts for his mother, and we have probably a thereabouts for his father. So Edgar Allan Poe, at 40 years old, was ancient in his family. So Edgar Allan Poe's father probably died at 27. Edgar Allan Poe's mother, we'll say, died at 23 and a half. Edgar Allan Poe's brother died at 24. And there we have Virginia, who also died at 24. This was a rough and tumble world. A world that we have to be thankful. If there is any literary discussion to be had from this, I think any cultural ambiance to be taken from this, if there is any broader appeal, broader intellectual appeal from this poem to be taken, number one, you try writing a sonnet to your mother-in-law. I don't even have a mother-in-law. Can't stand her. Number two, how fast things can change. How fast things can change. Edgar Allan Poe's entire family, his sister, I believe, died at 62, but looked like she was 142. His brother died at 24. He died at 40. He was ancient by his family's standards. Right now, today, I'm 38. It is difficult for me to imagine a world in which I would be the ancient one in my family. Still, that said, I had a single grandparent. When I was born, I think I had two surviving grandparents, but I only remember having met a single grandparent. My paternal grandfather. My paternal grandmother was gone. My paternal grandfather was gone before I was born. My paternal grandmother, or my maternal grandfather was gone before I was born. My maternal grandmother, I believe, died when I was 3 or 4, but I have no memory of her. So in that amount of time, so I was born in 1985. Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809. We'll say 1810, 170 years before I was born. I have a sort of similar kind of family. People didn't last that long in my family tree. So in the time betwixt Edgar Allan Poe's life and mine, people not lasting all that long went from was dead at 27 to was dead at 55 or 60. If that is how fast life expectancy, even for short-lived families, I don't know. I believe everyone that I grew up with, all the kids that I sort of hung out with as a child, had more than one grandparent. So probably similar types of expiration dates in Edgar Allan Poe's family as mine. Still, at 38, I'm not an old guy. At 38, Edgar Allan Poe was nearly dead. If that's how fast fortunes can change by a factor of 2, right? Dying at 54 as opposed to 27, how fast can they go right back? How fast can this revert? Can this upward trend revert to something dark and ugly and miserable and pardon me, and short-lived as the world in which Edgar Allan Poe lived? The general life expectancy right now, I believe, is 72. I think. Maybe it's 80. Maybe it's 80. But it is projected to be going down. The average life expectancy is projected to be going down. How fast could our society be back in this place, in this miserable place where everybody's keeling over in their 20s? You make it to 30, you had a good life, pal. It's time to move over. And here's one of the things that we don't really, and this is probably a tangent, but we're here for a sonnet written to a mother-in-law. What could be more tangential than that? Here's one thing that we don't really credit with as important as it is. Now, my generation is kind of mad at the boomers because the boomers won't retire, won't move to the side. They won't even die. My generation, kind of, go sit down, Grandpa. Move aside, Dad. But the cultural stability provided by people working the same job for longer adds to social cohesion. So, Edgar Allan Poe's family is kind of a bad example because his mother and father were both actors, and nothing requires less talent than that. But Edgar Allan Poe's father died at 27. Say he was a steel worker. Maybe he got into working steel at 18. Got his job at 18, died at 27. That's a 9-year career. Not a whole lot of time there to learn tricks of the trade, not a whole lot of time there to innovate, not a whole lot of time there to foster the next generation of steelworker. The world in which we live, I've been doing the same type of work for 20 years. Off and on, I've had the same job at the same company for 20 years. You, moving up as it goes, but I can pass along everything that I have learned about the sales system, everything that I have learned about marketing, about setting a shelf, about all of these things. I can pass those along to the next people who come in. The minute careers start getting shorter and shorter, all of a sudden, things don't run quite so smoothly anymore. All of a sudden, things which previously, so where I work, that's not that great big a deal, right? But pretend you're a truck driver, not having a whole lot of experience, not learning the tricks of the trade, not having someone to pass that knowledge down to you, all of a sudden becomes very dangerous, not just for you, but for other people on the road. So the minute that careers get shorter, a little bit of that erodes. A little bit of that social cohesion erodes. How fast, how quickly might we end up back in the same type of world where someone, a literary genius like Edgar Allan Poe, as so proclaimed even by Harold Bloom, the snootiest of snoots, how long before the literary career of someone like Edgar Allan Poe is just 20-ish years? Say, obviously he was writing his whole life, but how much would we have benefited had Edgar Allan Poe made it to 50 as opposed to 40? Made it to 60 as opposed to 40? How many better iterations? So we've gone through in this series, October, the Edgar Allan Poe playlist here on the channel, several different stories that are kind of iterations on the same type of story. How much would American letters have benefited had Edgar Allan Poe died at 60, a drunk, instead of 40, a drunk? Even if we grant him that same painful expiration, 20 more years of iterating on his craft could have made a world of difference to American letters. And that's the same for everything. So maybe we take for granted the world in which we live, but it could be all over very quickly. Be afraid. Be very afraid. That's all I have for this discussion. If you enjoy or appreciate what it is that I do on this channel, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literary lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more, because I hope to have you back for the next one.